Welcome to Dementia Friendly Prince George's County, Maryland Northern Sector webinar series for caregivers. Today's topic is Resilience and Coping Strategies for Dementia Caregivers, presented by Dr. Miriam Galindo. Sponsored by Prince George's County Government and the Department of Family Services.
I'm going to be presenting today on one of my favorite topics, resiliency and coping strategies for dementia caregivers, which would be you. So let's begin. So as a professional and then also as a former caregiver for my own dad, I'm really excited about these concepts. We're going to be talking about a couple of things: what resiliency is and why resiliency is so critical for dementia caregivers. And then, of course, how to develop strategies for building resiliency in yourself. Caregiving, as it says right here in the slide, for people with dementia in particular, can be filled with joy, but it can also be very challenging. And the reason it's challenging is for two reasons. One is, unlike any other form of caregiving, it involves a phenomenon called sustained vigilance, which means you're always on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, always thinking 20 steps ahead. I remember my dad was the last thing I would think of at night, the thing that I dreamed about during the night, and then the first thing I thought about in the morning. And I'm sure you can relate to that. But the second thing that makes this a challenging task is that this disease is marked by uncertainty and ambiguity, meaning there's no clear cause, there's really no cure, and it has an unpredictable course. So what one person's dementia looks like may not look like what your loved one is going through, or what happened yesterday may not occur in the same way today. So there's a lot of uncertainty, which in itself is stressful. So the problem is that when stress occurs in a little burst, that's good, that's self-preserving, but chronic stress over time can lead to disease. So this is what we're going to be talking about in a nutshell. Where do we want to go with this? Well, the goal is what's called resiliency. And resiliency means the ability to adjust to a change, to keep going and not give up despite adversity, and to emerge not just the same as you were, but an even stronger person for it. So you don't get to bypass the stress, but you go through it and you keep going, and then you emerge on the other end stronger and better than before. That's resilience. Oh, you ask. So you're thinking, okay, if you're saying that stress can make me sick, and here I am trying to take care of a person who has an illness, how do I become resilient? Is this something that that I'm just born doing, or is this something that I have to learn to do? And the good news is there are things you can do to enhance resiliency. It is true that some people, a lot of caregivers, in fact, just have this kind of almost innate desire to keep pushing and persisting. But there are things that can actually make the pushing, destructive on yourself, and there's things that you can do to actually enhance resiliency. And this is what we're going to talk about today, is how to enhance that resiliency. So the first thing we're going to talk about is understanding the stress response itself. And then as your takeaway for little tips on how you can enhance your own resiliency, I've arranged it according to the letter P. So 6 P's for increasing resilience. And those would be positivity, practicing the feeling, playing music, addressing physical health, finding meaning and purpose, and recruiting a posse. And we're going to go through each of those points with a slide so that you get the full expanded view of these steps toward resiliency. So let's talk first about the stress response. So the first thing to keep in mind is what I talked about before. and that was stress in taking care of a person with an illness can make you ill. And you might be saying, is true? And yes, it is. And so let me explain why. This is what happens to the brain and body as a result of a perceived threat. When you're under stress and when your brain perceives, something's going to go sideways and I'm feeling threatened, it responds with a cascade of stress hormones and chemicals throughout your body. And you may have heard about this. It's called the flight-fight response. And what that involves is your brain is sending signals throughout your body, especially to the adrenal glands on top of your kidneys there. And it's screaming danger, danger, and your body is responding as if there is danger. And it's either going to run or it's going to fight. That's kind of what it's preparing itself for. And the physiological changes that occur are dilation of the pupils, dry mouth, fast breathing, your heart is pounding fast, tense muscles, your digestion slows down because you don't need it when you're in danger, and your palms start sweating. So that's the stress response. Now, in the short term, that's not a bad thing. So when somebody runs in front of your car and you jam on the brakes, you may feel that, like your hands are shaking, your heart is beating fast, your mouth is dry. That is a stress response, but that's short term, and then it dissipates and the chemicals are out of your body because you don't need them after that. But when you're doing something over the long term that's stressful, like caring for somebody with dementia, those stress hormones and chemicals just circulate throughout your body long term. That's not good. And here's what happens as the effect of chronic stress. Again, the stress hormones are things like cortisol, norepinephrine, and adrenaline. All of them, by the way, are released by various parts of the adrenal glands that sit on top of your kidneys like little hats. When you've got those stress hormones just going full blast, and they don't shut off despite, the initial stressor going away because it's chronic stress that you're dealing with, you could set your body and brain up for anxiety and depression, for digestive problems, for headaches, heart disease, sleep disruptions, suppressed immunity, and even memory problems. And by the way, with suppressed immunity, a lot of times the medical literature will say you're kind of setting the stage for cancer because every time your cells replicate, they're replicating in a deficient way. And you know that your immune system actually fights little precursors of the cancer throughout your lifetime. When it can't fight, it's setting the stage for something that could be disastrous for you. So that's how serious this is, making sure that you're not under chronic stress that's not mitigated. And that's why it's so important that we talk about these 6 Ps. The resiliency factor, which I try to make it clever by saying here are 6 Ps: practice the feeling, positivity, recruiting a posse, playing music, physical health, and finding purpose and meaning. All of those things are aimed at helping you transcend the circumstances and protect yourself against stress, chronic stress. Yes, this is a stressful situation, but what we want to do is protect your body from the damage of your body responding with a stress response. So let's talk about the first strategy, and hopefully you have the slides, but if you don't, you could just make a note to yourself. The first strategy is positivity. Now, you and I might ask ourselves, what's so positive about dementia? I mean, it really feels like a game changer when you get that, you get the diagnosis. And even when you get the diagnosis, I don't know if you felt like this, but I certainly did, where you feel like, well, maybe it's not as bad as other people's. This is going to be a special dementia. My dad won't be suffering that much, and we can handle this. And so it's yeah, we're going to say what's so positive about it. And truly, we all go through stages of grief as we're faced with each stage of the diagnosis. So we might go into denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and sadness, and then go back to anger, bargaining, just keep circulating through those stages of grief until we finally reach a place of acceptance. That is normal. And frankly, as you're going through the dementia process, the journey with your loved one, you're going to go through the gamut, sometimes every day. And it's called anticipatory grief. You're actually grieving before your loved one even dies, because every day or every week you're seeing little pieces fade away that you saw before. And it's sad. And so we as caregivers grieve in refracted doses every day. Some days are more challenging than others, and honestly, there's no right way to grieve. But here's the difference, and it's not just a false optimism. Once we get to the place of acceptance, which is supposed to be at the very end of this grief, the stages of grief, this is the state of mind where we say to ourselves, okay, this is what is. I can't change the circumstances, but I choose to change my attitude about the circumstances. And I promise when you get there, something glorious happens, because suddenly what you thought was a dead end in your own mind and in your own heart, opens up, and you've got a whole highway ahead of you of possibilities, and even some joy. So this positivity is exactly what it says here. The reality of life is that your perceptions, right or wrong, influence everything else you do. When you get a proper perspective, you may be surprised how many other things fall into place. So the grieving that leads up to acceptance is sometimes occludes your vision, and once you reach a place of acceptance, your eyes open in a way they weren't before. So that's the positivity I'm talking about. So here's the interesting thing, and this is kind of a representation of what we're doing in our own minds. Every experience we have is actually based on our own perceptions of reality. It's not that there's a reality out there that is, and there's only one way to look at it. If you think about it, one person, like look up at the left-hand corner, one person may be saying, well, I see 4 sticks, and the other says, I see 3. And if you take each of their perspectives, you can see exactly what they're seeing, right? And this is just kind of a schematic to kind of represent what I'm trying to share with you. But yes, dementia is merciless, and yes, it's tragic. But you can also tell yourself, I am going to see this differently. I'm going to engage with my loved one each day in a different way. So positivity is a perfect way to increase the resilience in your life and also decrease stress. How? That's the clincher, is how are you going to get this positivity, right? So the first thing is adjust your vision. And I gave an example here. Previously, you may have focused on task accomplishment and productivity. I know I certainly did. Like even getting 2 loads of laundry done was like, okay, that's successful, or checking things off on my to-do list. When I was caring for my dad, I adjusted my vision and my focus. And what I learned is the key to a successful day was just, did you experience more joy than not? Were you able to reduce pain and fear? And if I was able to do that, the day was successful. If the laundry is still undone, if the dishes are still in the sink, so be it. But I was able to achieve those things. And that's kind of what you do. You focus on the quality of life instead of the quantity, which is really interesting because dementia will actually teach you to do that. And then the second step toward getting to positivity is develop realistic optimism. And again, that means strive toward a place of acceptance where you're not running all over town trying to find the magic cure for this dementia, but you're just accepting this is it, and this is what we'll do, to enjoy and celebrate each day. You will see the challenges as they are, but you're going to get informed, like taking part in webinars like this or taking advantage of any other seminar or educational program on dementia, and then be willing to take action. Always helpful to be kind of action oriented because it keeps us from a place of helplessness, which this disease certainly can get us to. Realistic optimism is just confidence plus optimism, and that helps motivate us. That's all it is. And the confidence comes in gaining a lot of knowledge, honestly. That really helps. And then the other factor that can contribute to realistic optimism is catch the words you say to yourself. So if you're saying things like, I can't do this, it should not surprise you if you really can't. You know, you start feeling like, why do I feel so stuck? Instead, start saying words that are kind of energizing to yourself. Like, it feels like I can't do this, but I used to say to myself, if I can think it, some brilliant person invented it. So I'm just going to get on the internet and look for whether or not somebody's invented this thing. And sure enough, I'd find it. So that's kind of how you do it. You just don't let your own words trap you. All right, here's the second strategy, the second P, and that's practice the feeling. So here's a question for you. Does happiness make you smile, or is it the other way around? And surprise, surprise, happiness might make you think that, like, in other words, you say, well, I got to be happy in order to feel like I want to smile. But no, smiling, even if it's a fake smile, can actually make you feel happy. So it turns out, according to the research, that the brain is a sucker for smiling faces, including not only this picture of this cute little baby, but your own face. So you can see your own face smile, and that will trigger mirror neurons in the brain to simulate that. So little smilers in there, and the smiling actually triggers or tricks your brain into thinking you're happy. So isn't that interesting? A lot of us would come to believe that if I'm happy, then I'll smile. If I'm not happy, I'm not. What is there to smile about? When the reverse is actually true. If you push yourself to smile, you'll become happy. So smiling is as contagious as a yawn. And in this case, behavior precedes the feeling. So let me see if I've got this on the next page. No, I don't. So there are several studies where they actually jammed a stick or a pencil in people's mouths, not poking down their throat, but sideways. And so it pulled back their lips. And yeah, we could say, well, that's kind of a sneer, actually. That's not a smile. But it actually did the trick. The people would walk around with sticks in their mouths, and then they'd test the little chemicals and get them to, you know, take little tests to see, okay, are you actually legitimately happier? And they'd compare the results to the group that didn't have these sticks in their mouths. And sure enough, the people that had the fake smiles actually were happier. It's amazing. Another study, they had people just smile in a mirror, and then they'd walk away and their mood would shift. So it's interesting, isn't it? The other thing that you can do to practice the feeling is laughter therapy. There's actually people who make some money on this. So, you know, some therapists who think it's their business to get everybody in a group and just laugh, even if it's a phony laugh. But you can also do it to yourself for free. You can watch a YouTube video, watch stand-up comedy or a funny movie. And the research says, in this case in particular, that doing that even just 4 times a month can result in lower blood pressure, lower heart rate, lower salivary concentration of stress hormones, and then increased serotonin, which is a feel-good hormone. And guess what? This is free and no side effects, right? Some people have even tested this and they've been able to get rid of illnesses by laughing. So it's not a laughing matter, so to speak. So here's what's important about practicing a feeling. Going back to that stress theory that I talked about before, Depression itself weakens the immune system. Sadness weakens the immune system. And in fact, a lot of research will say depression will set the stage for later life dementia. So it's really important that you tackle the sadness. And by contrast, laughter releases endorphins. It reduces pain, it boosts immune resistance, it decreases heart rate and blood pressure, it fosters brain connectivity. You can actually problem solve much better. It connects us to each other and it ignites hope. And as you all know, laughter is very forgiving. People with a good sense of humor, you always notice they're less judgmental and they just kind of roll with things, where people without a sense of humor tend to get pretty rigid. And that's not in our imaginations. It's changing the brain. So this guy at the very end in red, it says, if you lose your power to laugh, you lose your power to think. So you want to preserve your brain, right? Because you're the thinker of the family. Here's a third strategy for lowering stress and building resiliency, and that is playing music. Wow, there's so many studies out there that show that exposure to classical music reduces the stress response. And it's not just classical, because if classical isn't your thing, maybe it makes you more stressed. But in this study, it was classical music. The key, of course, to reducing stress for you is find the music that reduces stress for you. So self-selected music, something that you like, that's relaxing during times that you need to relax, or invigorating and familiar. Those are the keys. And then, of course, calming music is most consistent with a normal resting state of the body. So you can actually find music that replicates your heartbeat. I used to have a music teacher who would speak very harshly against hip hop and rap and said, it's causing these kids to have heart problems. And I suppose on some level she was kind of right, because it does affect your heart rate. And for you and I, who have to care for others, calming music that is really consistent with your heart rate, which is supposed to be about 60 to 100 beats a minute, you'll know it when you feel it. That's good for helping your body kind of get out of a stress response. Here's what the research says. 25 minutes a day of classical music, in this case it was classical, reduces cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, a damaging stress hormone. It triggers the release of dopamine, which is a feel-good brain chemical and hormone. Dopamine, by the way, is when you feel like super happy about something, that's your dopamine being released. But music can do that without you even trying. It alters brainwave activity in a positive direction. It reduces anxiety up to 65%. It lowers blood pressure, reduces heart rate, and even reduces pain, the perception of pain. Again, without even side effects or a cost associated with it. So that's pretty good news. So 25 minutes of classical music a day. I know what I do here at the office is I play classical music, kind of a low-level classical music all day long. And then when I'm home, low-level classical music all day long. And it's soothing, and it's kind of methodical at times and even-tempered, but you can do that with something you love, some music you love. I'm not trying to impose classics on you. This is just a study involving the classics. Now, here's a real fun bonus. In addition to helping caregivers, it also helps your loved one with dementia. Again, it needs to be familiar music. The interesting thing is, even as the brain is damaged by amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles, and also in things like Lewy body dementia, the Lewy bodies. So whatever it is that's causing damage to the brain, despite that, there is a center in the brain that is focused on recognizing familiar music, and that stays miraculously untouched. Isn't that amazing? So it's like this little hedge of protection is built around that part of the brain. And that part of the brain recognizes familiar music, and it can kind of coordinate with other parts of the brain. So um, I'll just cut to the final line here. Music can significantly reduce agitation and anxiety in persons with dementia, but it also activates, by the way. So there's a picture of my own dad right there. He got to a point where he was sitting all day, so that's why he's sitting, and he's got that neck rest because his muscles were and coordination were deteriorating at that point. So he had to have his head held up. And when there were distractions during the day, it was hard for him to focus. So that's why I use the headphones. But he's not just smiling there, he's laughing. And he was able to make better eye contact after he listened to his music. And he would want to talk where he wasn't able to talk before. And it just more engaged and more alive. And that's what music can do for your loved one. So it's not just good for you, it'll reduce stress and anxiety for your loved one too. And there's lots of studies to back that up, by the way. So, all right, so the fourth strategy here, and that is pay attention to your physical health. So I know this is the last thing on your list to do because honestly, you make the appointment for the doctor and then something comes up, you can't find your loved one, you have to cancel the doctor's appointment, or you had a dentist appointment and then you had to rearrange it. It seems like something's always coming up to interfere and your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But it's really important that you don't postpone these appointments. Caregivers routinely focus on the good of others, and that's you. That's what you do, often to the exclusion of yourself. Your body will tell you when it's running on empty. The problem is we get so used to kind of pushing that, just like, I don't know if you do this, but you'll look at, your tank is low on your gas tank and you just go, I think I've got enough to get to the next city. You just push it. Um, and that's what we kind of do with our bodies too. I think I can do this. I don't have time right now. I just need to keep going. But it's really important that you pay attention to those warning lights because there are things that your body will scream out to you if you listen that say something is not okay. So it's really important that you go to preventative doctor and dental appointments, like every 6 months, getting your teeth checked and cleaned, and that you get your physical. And caregivers can often eat less fruits and vegetables than your body needs, and they even skip meals. They drink less water than the body needs because you're just on the go so much. And then you might engage in less exercise because you just can't even leave the house to go for a walk. So those are the things that oftentimes happens to the body. So as a caregiver, in order to create this resiliency, and in order to help your body resist stress and stay healthy, almost trick it into believing it's okay. Despite the stress, you want to make sure you drink plenty of water every day. In California, it's super dry, so we all walk around with water bottles. I'm not sure about your part of the nation, but it's really important to get plenty of water every day to maintain your cell health. It's also important to eat foods rich in antioxidants like fruits and vegetables. Follow up on your dental appointments at least every 6 months and get your teeth clean. Go for a walk, even if you have to have somebody come to the house to keep an eye on things so you can go and spend 20 minutes in nature. Now that's tricky because where I live, there's not much nature. It's just a bunch of concrete. But you may have, like I have, a little backyard where there's trees and flowers in your garden, and you can just spend time just kind of reacclimating right there. Just find a tree. So this is all backed by research, and it again springs your body back to where it needs to be. So good nutrition, hydration, and exercise actually protects your body from the effects of chronic stress. The way it does it is it reduces inflammation. Inflammation, I'm sure you've read, is highly important for the prevention of a number of different diseases: cardiovascular disease, dementia, even diabetes, obesity, cancer. So inflammation is a big topic nowadays, and exercise can reduce that. It also increases blood flow to your body and also to your brain. It promotes healthy blood pressure, it boosts memory, it improves mood, it supports restful sleep, and it reduces stress hormones. There's the stress hormones again. So do you see, you're not consciously saying, go away. You're just going out and exercising and eating right, making sure you're hydrated, exposing yourself to nature. All of these things actually do the trick to promoting resiliency. So now we go to the fifth strategy for developing resiliency, and that is finding meaning and purpose in your situation. This concept was first introduced by a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, Dr. Viktor Frankl, back in the 40s. What Dr. Frankl observed during his own experience at places like Auschwitz is that when human beings have a clear sense of meaning and purpose, they develop a capacity to transcend the toughest of circumstances. Why? Because they're not focused on the what anymore, they're focused on the why. In fact, right here, Simon Sinek says, it's not the what that's important, it's the why. People who have a clear sense of purpose find it easier to bounce back, and having a purpose gives us the energy to meet our demands. It's really critical. In fact, I told you about the 5 stages of grief, and some of you may know they were developed by somebody named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross back in the, I would say, 60s and 70s. But later in the 90s, Dr. David Kessler said, hey, I know. The way you get to, the way you get through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, the way you get to a place of acceptance is find meaning and purpose. And he called it the 6th stage of grief. Once you find meaning and purpose, you can get to a place of acceptance. So it's really, really interesting, and it will help reduce your stress and increase your resiliency. So again, the question becomes, well, how do you do this? So the way you find meaning and purpose is, first of all, to recognize that it always is. So it's not like, well, meaning only exists in positive experiences, and when you're in a negative experience, then you say to yourself, what's the meaning and purpose of this? There's no meaning and purpose. This is purposeless. The first thing you need to have your brain do is accept that, no, even in any circumstance, whether it's, by all perceptions, good or bad, there is purpose and there is meaning, and it's there for the discovery. And so that's like the foundation of this thought, that it's there, just look for it. One of the ways you can look for it is an expression of gratitude. It helps us overcome trauma and enhance resilience when we're grateful. And this isn't the phony gratitude, like, well, I'm grateful for each day, I'm grateful I'm breathing, because on the inside you're going, I don't know about this, you're kind of trying to talk yourself into it. No, I mean, like, find something to thank somebody for, like the guy that's mowing the lawn. You go out there and say, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate what you're doing. It's so hot outside, and you do this every day without complaint. I just really appreciate you. Or you see some little kid that's laughing, and you just think in your head, I'm just so happy that this little child is, has their innocence protected and they're having a blast. It's that, that kind of genuine gratitude. You also want to identify a purpose that brings you passion and joy. So there may have been something that you loved in the past, and right now you're feeling like, will I ever get back to art, or will I ever get back to playing the piano, or writing that book that I always wanted to write, or just seeing my grandkids. I can't even travel right now. And what Viktor Frankl used to say, or do even, Viktor Frankl's the man that went through the prison camps, 4 different prison camps, by the way. He called it immersively to immersively imagine the outcome. So what he would do to get through each day is he had two things that he kept in the forefront of his mind: the face of his wife, because of course he was separated from his wife, and his commitment to write a manuscript and publishing it once he got out of the prison camp. And that kept him focused on the light ahead of him. But it can also be something simple. Like for me, my father, thankfully, had told me 20 years before he was diagnosed that what he wanted more than anything at the end of his life is to see the face of God and hear God say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." I can't even tell you how much that helped me as a caregiver, because I could immersively imagine the outcome of his life. And it kept me focused. Like instead of being so focused on a cure, I could say, I could remind myself, okay, he wanted to see the face of God. He wanted to hear God say, welcome and, well done, good and faithful servant. And so my job is to get him to the finish line with as much joy as possible, as least amount of anxiety and fear and pain as possible. And that gave me a purpose and helped kind of direct all this energy. Um, so that's what's meant by that. How do you do this? How do you kind of find this meaning and purpose? Well, you want to listen to your heart, meaning listen to whatever your deepest strivings are telling you. And you may do that with meditation or prayer or guided imagery. You may put something out into the universe, just saying it. I want to, someday I want to write a book, and write it on a little index card and put it up on the refrigerator, or make each day count, or something where you're putting out your intentions, so that when you see your big miracle, you don't miss it. And you can say, aha, this makes my life meaningful. This gives it purpose. This isn't just random. I'm just part of a carefully orchestrated thing called life, and everything's going to be okay. It has that ability. The sixth strategy and final strategy is recruit your posse. And it was the only way I could describe, using a P word, this need to connect with other people. The hard part about dementia caregiving is it can be isolating, because your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller as your loved one's needs get more and more intense, and they're just not able to do as much as they used to do, and you're there by their side, and so you find your own life falling away. But in order to build resiliency, it's really important that you stay connected with the outside world. The American Psychological Association actually says that isolation can trigger the fight-flight response, that very thing we talked about at the very beginning of this presentation. So it can cause the stress response. And unfortunately, because you don't have the benefit of other people, it's hard to then stop it, right? Because you may be able to kind of bounce some ideas off of somebody else and have somebody else make you laugh, but when you're isolated, it's not there. So you're kind of left with your own stress cycle. Isolation also lowers immunity. It increases inflammation and increases negative thoughts. And as I said before, caring for a loved one with dementia can be very isolating. So how do you recruit your posse? Because it's tricky. We caregivers like to be the caregiver. We don't necessarily like to ask people for help. We don't like to burden people. We don't like to, add something to somebody else's plate because we identify so strongly with that feeling that we ourselves have so much on our plates. But it's kind of a must. It's almost like you have to create a football team or a business with you as the CEO or you as the quarterback, and you have all these people that are kind of joining you in this task of helping your loved one have a good quality of life. So here's how you do that. Here's how you break the isolation. One of those strategies is doing what you're doing today, which is at least turning on your screen, learning as much as possible, and kind of reminding your brain you're not alone. Other people have walked this journey before and they're watching this along with you. And even like me or like other people that volunteer for different organizations, we've walked this road too. My dad had dementia for almost 10 years before he died of end stage complications due to end stage dementia. Um, and so we kind of know that walk, and that helps to know that you're not by yourself. We're here, with you. The second thing is to talk with other caregivers who understand what you're going through. There's nothing better than to talk with somebody who gets it, not somebody who sympathizes and says, well, that must be awful, but somebody who says, yeah, that happened with me and my mom. It just, you feel like a kindred spirit, like they get it. I don't even have to fully explain what I'm going through. You also want to schedule respite care to take some time away, even if it's for only a few hours a week. And during those few hours a week, you can go, play cards with your friends, or you can play golf, or you can go take a class, go for a walk, anything to just kind of take you away from the place of sustained vigilance, as we talked about before. So respite care can be with the professionals. There are some agencies that can send a caregiver to your home, and that caregiver can remain there until you come home. But it can also maybe be with somebody in your family who can just commit to one day every week, like a Tuesday between 1 and 3. They are always there and you can count on them. Predictability, by the way, can reduce stress, because remember, we talked about in the very beginning of this presentation that the lack of predictability and the ambiguity is actually exacerbating the stress. So predictability, like every Tuesday, 1 to 3, I get my respite. That's really good for the soul. The third thing you can do is get educated on the road ahead. So yes, you want to know what you're dealing with today, but if you prepare yourself and you know the guideposts ahead, it will give you a sense of control, which will reduce that ambiguity and uncertainty, and it will lower your anxiety and stress. See how that works? So the more you know, the more empowered you feel, the more you feel like, okay, I got this, I know what to expect. You can kind of put it in a box in your head and feel less stressed about what the future could hold. The fourth thing you want to do, of course, is feed your spirit. Do things that you enjoy. I know it's really easy to let those things fall to the wayside. I think, in retrospect, I see how my attitude was, the city is on fire. Come on, we need to put out the fires. And I was very much about, helping my dad with every single thing that he was going through. And but to the detriment of my own spirit, a lot of things that I probably could have done just to maintain my own enjoyment, and I would set those aside and say, I'll get to those later. I'm sure you relate. And then you want to build that team. You want to really ask people to step in. And listen, it's not a burden. A lot of people are feeling helpless and they stand by the side just saying, I don't know what to do. And so they kind of back off. Where if you said, the best thing you could possibly do is if you could just come for 1 hour and just read a book to your dad, it would mean the world to him. And, so you give him a task. A lot of people actually appreciate that. And, something that's not going to overburden them too. Some people are better able to commit to every week, and some people just once a month. Some people can do it long distance, like, yes, I can do a FaceTime call, where other people are willing to come face to face. So, you look at everybody's strengths like a good CEO, and then you suggest to people this would really be super helpful. And for those people in your family who just cannot donate the manpower, they might be willing to just donate groceries. like, hey, I can't do much, but I'm willing to send some groceries, have them delivered to you, which would be such a help, right? And so I always end with some resources. I'll go over them, but then um, I know that the host is wanting to have some parting words with you before we close for the night. So here's some resources that are big here in California with a university that's in Los Angeles, and it's UCLA caregiver training videos. You can get them on the internet. So the website there is dementia.uclahealth.org, and there's going to be a drop-down menu of caregiver education videos. And in those videos, you'll see kind of a before and after, like caregivers who are trying to intercede on some kind of behavior, and they show a not so great intervention that doesn't really work, and then they give you some tips, and then they show you a video that has a new improved way of intervening that actually works. And you'll see all these topics that you can check. Anything from wandering to alcohol abuse to what do you do when somebody wants to drive and they really shouldn't, to refusing to bathe, not wanting to take medication, agitation, anxiety, all of these different behaviors. You are also welcome, even though we're in California in a completely different county. There's no boundaries. We're happy to help you. So if you ever want to use our helpline, you are welcome to do so. It used to be open 24 hours a day. Now it's going to be, the regular business hours, 9 to 5. Remember, we're in Pacific Standard Time. So the number is 844-435-7259. And if you just get a message, just leave a message and somebody will call you back. And these people that talk to you are willing to give you some tips, just listen, give you some ideas, give you referrals, references, whole lot of things. And then we've got a website too, www.altsoc.org.